In the city of Agra, in the hot days of August 1939, a boy child saw the light of day in the quiet home of a Brahmin family. The parents, who came from a deeply religious Hindu family, named their newborn son Jagdish Chandra. No one could have suspected then that in a few years, this little boy would come forward with claims that would not only shock his family, but become one of the most important cases in the history of reincarnation research. The Chandra family was a typical Brahmin family, belonging to the highest layer of the Indian caste system. The father, a respected community leader, strictly observed Brahmin traditions. This meant that family members were vegetarians, regularly performed their religious ceremonies, and placed great emphasis on spiritual purity and adherence to caste rules. It was in this environment that Jagdish grew up, surrounded by the atmosphere of ancient Hindu wisdom and traditions. When the little boy was about 3.5 years old, something strange happened. One day, when his father was preparing for his religious bath in the Ganges, Jagdish suddenly spoke up. He didn't speak the way a 3-year-old child usually does. His voice was serious, his words clear and surprisingly adult. He told his father that there was no need for this ritual bath because he himself had already done this. But not now, in this life, but in another earlier life. This statement was like a stone thrown into a quiet pond. The waves spread far and wide. The father at first didn't know what to think. Perhaps the child had just heard some story somewhere. Perhaps his imagination was just playing with him. But Jagdish didn't stop at this one statement. In the following weeks and months, he talked more and more about the life he claimed to have lived before he was born. The little boy said he had lived in Benares, that holy city which Hindus call Varanasi, and which lies on the banks of the Ganges. Benares has always held special significance in the Hindu religion. It is considered one of the holiest places in the world, where Shiva himself dwells. It is said that whoever dies in Benares is freed from the endless cycle of births and deaths, from samsara. Jagdish described in detail the circumstances of his previous life. He said his name was Jai Gopal, and that he lived in a well-to-do family. But what was truly shocking, he claimed he was not a Brahmin in that life, but a Chausi, meaning he belonged to a much lower caste. The Chausis traditionally prepared and sold food fried in oil, which was completely contrary to Brahmin traditions. This detail alone is remarkable, because why would a child growing up in a Brahmin family claim he was previously a person belonging to a lower caste? The little boy also talked about what foods he liked to eat in Benares. He talked in detail about pakoras, the delicious fried delicacies, about meat-containing dishes that were strictly forbidden for any Brahmin family. Even the thought of them was considered unclean in an orthodox Brahmin household. Yet Jagdish not only talked about these foods, but craved them. He sometimes explicitly asked for them, which caused extraordinary scandal in his family. The father, who was deeply attached to Brahmin traditions, initially listened to his son's words with shock and concern. How was it possible for a Brahmin boy to desire such foods? How did he even know what these foods were like? The family tried to silence the boy, hoping these were just passing childish notions. But Jagdish persisted in his claims, and his stories became increasingly detailed. The child described the streets of Benares, the houses, the temples. He spoke of Dasasvamedh Ghat, that famous series of steps leading to the waters of the Ganges. He talked about Manikarnika Ghat, where corpses are cremated, in the belief that whoever is reduced to ash there goes directly to salvation. These details were so precise that the family could no longer ignore them. Dr. Ian Stevenson, who later thoroughly documented Jagdish's case, wrote about this. The child's knowledge of Benares was extremely detailed. These were not general pieces of information that could have been learned from books or stories, but concrete, living experiences that only someone who had actually lived in that city could have known. Jagdish didn't just mention places and foods. He also spoke of a woman whom he called his wife. He said this woman's name was Sundari and that he loved her very much. Moreover, he even told that he also had a son in that life. The little boy spoke of these people with such love and nostalgia, as if he had only recently been separated from them. If you're interested in these incredible reincarnation stories, don't forget to press the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single case. Dr. Stevenson, who studied reincarnation cases for more than 4 decades, paid special attention to Jagdish's story. As in every case, he thoroughly investigated whether there had been any prior connection between the Chandra family and Benares. It turned out that the family had never been to Benares, had no relatives or acquaintances there. Agra and Benares lie several hundred kilometers apart, and in the 40s, this meant a distance that practically excluded random information exchange. The strangest aspect of Jagdish's behavior was that he increasingly rejected the Brahmin lifestyle. He didn't want to maintain the vegetarian diet, wasn't interested in religious ceremonies, and was explicitly interested in foods that were taboo for every Brahmin. On one occasion, when the family attended a gathering, the little boy simply walked up to the table where meat-containing dishes were and asked if he could eat them. The family watched in shock. Such behavior from a Brahmin child was unthinkable. The situation became increasingly uncomfortable for the family. The father felt he had to do something. On one hand, he loved his son and didn't want to hurt him. On the other hand, he worried about the family's good reputation and their position in the community. A Brahmin family whose child broke such rules could easily lose their respect and social position. The decisive turning point came when a close acquaintance of the family, who had heard about Jagdish's strange claims, suggested they take the boy to Benares. Perhaps they would find some evidence there for what the child was claiming. The father initially hesitated. What would be the point of such a journey? But as the months passed and Jagdish's claims didn't cease, he finally decided to take this step. In the spring of 1944, when Jagdish was about 4.5 years old, his father took him to Benares. This was a long and exhausting journey at that time. They went by train, and when they arrived in the holy city, something wonderful happened. Jagdish, this little boy from Agra, who allegedly had never been to Benares in his life, suddenly came alive. An expression appeared on his face as if he had come home. When his father asked him if he could navigate the city, the little boy nodded. Then he set off and led his father through the narrow streets and alleys with such confidence, as if he had grown up there. He didn't hesitate, didn't ask anyone for directions. He headed straight for a certain house. As they approached, Jagdish became more and more excited. Finally, they stopped in front of a house on a busy street. The little boy pointed to the house and said, "I lived here." This was my house. The father looked around in amazement. How was this possible? Benares is a huge city with countless houses, streets, alleys. Yet his son led him straight here, as if he had a map in his head. They entered the house and met an elderly woman. When Jagdish saw her, he immediately exclaimed, "Sundari, it's you." The woman looked at the little boy in confusion. Who is this child, and how does he know her name? The father explained the situation, told what had brought them to Benares, and what his son claimed. Sundari, although initially standing bewildered about the matter, gradually began to listen to what the little boy said. Jagdish knew such details about her life and the house that only someone who really lived there could have known. He knew where the kitchen was, where the backyard was, where they kept the household items. He even knew that Sundari had a son, and he named the boy's name exactly. Then Jagdish told the most shocking detail. He claimed he had died in this house. He described in detail the circumstances of his death. He said he had been seriously ill, had a high fever, and finally died. He also remembered the moments of death. He spoke about what it felt like when his body slowly gave up the fight and how he left his physical body. Sundari listened in tears. Indeed, she had had a husband named Jai Gopal who had died exactly as the little boy described. It happened in 1938, just 1 year before Jagdish's birth. Her husband suffered from a fever illness and died within a few days. Now standing before her was a little boy from Agra who knew things that only her deceased husband could have known. Dr. Stevenson, who later interviewed both Sundari and the Chandra family in detail, wrote about this. This case is particularly strong evidence for the possibility of reincarnation, because it's not just about general memories, but concrete, verifiable details. The child's knowledge was so specific that it would have been impossible to acquire it through normal means. Jagdish's visit to Benares had a profound impact on both Sundari and the Chandra family. Sundari felt that something inexplicable had happened. Perhaps her husband really had returned. Perhaps his soul had chosen this little boy's body as its new dwelling. According to Hindu belief, this is entirely possible. The soul is reborn until it reaches moksha, ultimate liberation. For the Chandra family, this visit meant both relief and further confusion. It was a relief because they finally understood that their son was not simply a rebellious or strange child, but there was a deeper story behind his claims. But it also caused confusion because now, what should they do? How should they continue to raise a boy who clearly remembers a previous life that was completely contrary to their Brahmin values? Dr. Jim Tucker, who continued Stevenson's work at the University of Virginia, said about similar cases, children with reincarnation memories are often in emotional conflict. Two identities struggle within them, that of the new life and that of the old. This is especially difficult when the social or cultural backgrounds of the two lives are very different. In Jagdish's case, this conflict was particularly strong because there was a huge caste difference between the two lives. To be reborn into a Brahmin family while remembering a Chausi life presented an almost unimaginable dilemma. In Hindu society, the caste system is deeply embedded, and birth into a higher caste is generally considered a blessing. But for Jagdish, this seemed more like a burden because it deprived him of the foods and lifestyle he had become accustomed to in his previous life. One of the most interesting aspects of modern reincarnation research is that children often bring with them the dietary habits and preferences of their previous lives. Dr. Erlendur Haraldsson, the Icelandic psychologist who studied many cases in India and Sri Lanka, put it this way: food preferences can be particularly strong evidence because they are not easily learned or imitated. How could a child who has never tasted meat crave it if there were no deeper memory? As Jagdish grew, his memories gradually began to fade, which is characteristic of most reincarnation cases. Around the age of 6 or 7, he spoke less frequently about Benares and his previous life, but his dietary preferences remained. He continued to be drawn to foods that were natural in a Chausi family and continued to resist the strict Brahmin diet. Dr. Satwant Pasricha, a distinguished Indian psychologist who also examined Jagdish's case, stated, "This case highlights how deeply reincarnation, if it truly exists, can influence a person's identity. Not only do memories remain, but behavioral patterns, preferences, and emotional attachments as well. Modern developments in quantum physics offer new perspectives for understanding such cases. Dr. Stuart Hameroff, professor at the University of Arizona, who works on quantum consciousness theory, believes, if consciousness is quantum-level information that is not limited to the brain, then it can survive the death of the body and continue in a new biological system. This could explain why some children retain such detailed memories of a previous life. Dr. Pim van Lommel, the Dutch cardiologist and researcher of near-death experiences, also believes that consciousness is independent of the brain. Jagdish's case suggests that certain aspects of personality, memory, and identity can survive physical death. This is not religious dogma, but an empirical observation that requires serious scientific investigation. Jagdish's story also raises the question of what identity means. Who really was this boy? Jagdish Chandra, the Brahmin family's son, or Jai Gopal, the Chausi who lived and died in Benares, or somehow both at once? These questions are not merely philosophical curiosities, but deeply human dilemmas that touch upon how we see ourselves. Modern psychology struggles with how to interpret such cases. Traditional Freudian or behaviorist approaches do not provide satisfactory explanations. Dr. Bruce Grayson, psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, believes, if we take these cases seriously, then we need to rethink our theories about personality and identity. Perhaps human identity is not limited to a single life, but continues through a series of lives. After Jagdish became an adult, he rarely spoke about his childhood memories. New life experiences gradually pushed the old ones into the background. But those who knew his story knew that this was not a simple child, but someone who somehow lived two lives simultaneously. Skeptics, of course, question the authenticity of such stories. They argue that children are easily influenced, that families may unconsciously suggest information to them, or that memories may be fabricated. Paul Edwards, a philosopher who critically examined reincarnation cases, put it this way: even if these children really know things they shouldn't know, it doesn't prove reincarnation. There may be other explanations that haven't been discovered yet. However, Dr. Stevenson worked with extremely thorough methods to rule out these alternative explanations. In every case, he examined whether there had been prior connection between the families, whether information could have reached the child in any way, and how reliable the witnesses were. In Jagdish's case, all these investigations confirmed that the child could not have acquired the knowledge he possessed through normal means. One of the most convincing aspects of reincarnation cases is when children recognize places where they have never been. Dr. Jim Tucker conducted statistical analysis on more than 2,000 cases and found that in 75% of cases, children could accurately identify the locations of their previous lives without ever having been there. This number is statistically extremely significant and difficult to attribute to chance or fraud. Jagdish Chandra's story eventually received a quiet conclusion. As he grew up, he integrated into the Brahmin community, although his dietary preferences never completely changed. Sundari eventually accepted that although this boy carries something of her deceased husband, he is still a new person, a new life with new possibilities and a new destiny. Share this video if Jagdish Chandra's fascinating story touched you too, and write in the comments what you think is the explanation for these extraordinary memories. Can reincarnation truly exist? Or is there another, as yet unknown scientific explanation? Your opinion matters because these eternal questions touch us all, and only together can we approach the truth. Dr. Ian Stevenson collected more than 4,000 such cases worldwide over 45 years. His work fundamentally changed the scientific debate about reincarnation. Before him, this topic was mainly a religious or philosophical area. After Stevenson, however, it became a research field with concrete, empirical evidence. Medicine and neurology are slowly beginning to open up to these phenomena. Dr. Andrew Newberg, who researches the spiritual functions of the brain, believes that certain brain areas may activate in children who show reincarnation memories. This opens new research directions where spiritual experiences and brain processes are connected. According to Hindu philosophy, every person goes through countless lives until they reach perfection and enlightenment. Jagdish's case fits well into this worldview. After Jai Gopal's death, instead of being freed from the cycle of samsara, he was reborn into a Brahmin family. According to Hindu tradition, this can be progress, since birth into the Brahmin caste signifies a spiritually higher level. But in Jagdish's case, this higher birth came with conflicts because he remembered an earlier, different lifestyle. The law of karma, which plays a central role in Hindu and Buddhist thinking, teaches that the consequences of our actions carry over from one life to another. What karmic consequences did Jai Gopal's life and death have that led to Jagdish's birth? This question can spark theological and philosophical debates, but the point is that in the Hindu worldview, Jagdish's case is completely logical and natural. It's interesting to observe that the majority of reincarnation cases occur in cultures where belief in reincarnation is widespread. India, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, and other Asian countries produce many such cases. In the Western world, these phenomena are much rarer. Dr. Erlendur Haraldsson explains this as follows. It's not necessarily that these phenomena only occur in certain cultures. Rather, in those cultures where reincarnation is a natural part of the worldview, people are more open to receiving and reporting these cases. Professor Tucker, however, notes that there are also reincarnation cases in Western countries, although they are indeed rarer. He has documented several American and European cases where children showed similar memories. This suggests that the phenomenon is not merely cultural, but may indeed be universal. One of the greatest challenges for modern neuroscience is to understand how human consciousness works. We still don't know exactly how the brain creates consciousness and what the connection is between brain processes and subjective experiences. This is the so-called hard problem in the philosophy of consciousness. Reincarnation cases complicate this picture even further because they suggest that consciousness may not be limited to the brain. Dr. David Chalmers, one of the leading figures in the philosophy of consciousness, believes, if consciousness can truly be independent of the brain, then we need to completely rethink the fundamental assumptions of physicalism. Reincarnation cases, if authentic, pose a serious challenge to the materialist worldview. Jagdish's story raises not only scientific, but also deeply human questions. What happens to us when we die? Is there something that survives physical death? And if so, in what form? These are ancient questions that have occupied humanity in every culture and every age. Our thinking about death fundamentally influences how we live. If we believe that death is a definitive end, we live our lives differently than if we believe in the immortality of the soul and rebirth. Jagdish's case and stories like it encourage us to at least be open to the possibility that death is not the final station. Perhaps one of the most important contributions of reincarnation research is that it reminds us of humility. We still don't understand many things about the world, consciousness, and existence. Modern science has achieved tremendous results, but there are areas where we are still groping. Jagdish Chandra and cases like his show that reality may be much richer and more mysterious than the material worldview suggests. The final answer to the question of whether reincarnation truly exists may never be received with complete certainty. But cases like Jagdish's give sufficient reason to take this possibility seriously and continue research in this area. Dr. Stevenson's work established this research, and his legacy lives on in the work of Dr. Tucker and others who are committed to approaching these phenomena with scientific methods. Jagdish Chandra's story, like Reina Gupta's and many other children's worldwide, is a window into the deeper nature of consciousness. These stories teach us to remain open, to question, and never to assume we already know everything. Science truly advances when it is willing to confront phenomena that don't fit into existing paradigms. Human life may be much more than what we experience in a brief mortal existence. Perhaps it truly continues again and again until we finally reach that wisdom and perfection that every spiritual tradition teaches us. Jagdish's story reminds us that although our bodies are mortal, perhaps something deeper and more enduring resides within us, something that survives physical death and continues in new forms, in new lives.